Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. If you're new here, my name is Misty and I'm glad you're here. Today I have for you this huge stack of layouts. And what we're going to be doing today is going through these and talking about using circles as scrapbook design elements, from simpler ideas to more complex ideas. We'll be talking about full-scale circles, we'll be talking about grids, and everything in between. So I hope you'll join me, and if you stick around to the end of the video, I will have a layout process where I use scraps from a kit to create circles for yet another layout design. So let's get started. Since this is my 10 ways video, I did break down my circular designs into, I came up with about 13 ways actually that I use circles in my designs. So we'll go through this list and the layouts as we go. I do have this card here to cover up people who I don't have permission to have on film, so pardon me as I do that as we go along. So let's start with the easiest way to add circles to your design, and that is with products that are already circular in design. So doilies was the first example that I had in my stack here that I thought worked quite well, and circles help soften up edges, so this works great for those pages that you need to soften just a little bit. There's a lot of circular design pattern papers on the market, so you can use those to add that special energy to a layout. This one in particular has lots of circles, which is a higher energy, and because this one in particular has clocks on it, it focuses on the idea of movement through time. Now this one has circles in the background, which are fun and funky celebratory circles, so they start to set the mood. And then here I've started adding my own circles on to the layout, which we'll get to using circles as embellishing in a moment. The next category of circles is using circles to highlight certain areas of your design. So these photos were taken at a library event. They were very far away. The lighting was bad. So I've used circular embellishments, again, use those elements that are already designed for you, to highlight my daughter in these specific photos. This one is a little bit more subtle, but I used a cork circle here to highlight this photo of mail, and I've related that mail back to a story of when my daughter was little and she'd get the mail with my husband, and now she's a babysitter and checking the mail with this little cutie. Here's another way that I like to use circles to highlight elements. And these ones I just created with circle dies, and I lined up the dies so that I would end up with an outline of a circle. And so I've got this photo from far away that has a picture of my daughter's doorknob, and then I use a detail photo of a close-up of that doorknob, and I use these circles as a zoom effect to highlight areas of photos that are important to the story. And then as we're talking about highlighting areas, of course we can't move on without talking about highlighting an entire photo itself. And we'll also talk about using circles as shapes a little bit later in the video. Next up, we're going to talk about using circles to highlight journaling and titles. So here I have a big circle, and that's filled in with all of my journaling. And again, those circles help break up harsh lines and edges. This was a text message, a photo from a funny conversation I had with my daughter, and everything is very grid-like, but it was a very funny story, so I wanted to soften the mood with roundness. So these round circles here with my journaling, and then I'm starting to embellish. I know these ones are a little hard to see, with some more circles here, and we'll get to using circles as embellishment a little bit later. And then here I had this cute embellishment. Now I should say that this is not my design. This was from a class, but it highlights circle information well. This was a circle embellishment that had a title that I wanted to use, and because it was small, I made it bigger by adding a circle around it, so that draws in more attention to something that's small. And you'll also notice that we've got a banner or a border of half circles going on down there. All right, and then we're going to continue talking about using circles as both embellishing and journal spots. So here I've got a good example of using circles for both of those things. All of the color here is an embellishment to this page, and in fact it's the main embellishment to this page, as well as using the circle as part of my title sets the mood for the page. All right, after covering up some faces here, this one is using circles and numbers together to create a journaling flow. So I've numbered each photo grouping, and then that relates to, I just used the punched out shape to relate over here to the actual journaling. So circles, and then you can see I've also embellished with circles as well. So that is a great way to highlight little areas of your layout. All right, here I've used a row of circles, and that is some of the main embellishing on the page. So that is pretty simple. Here you can see another row of circles, and I've used them to hold actual embellishments, so they can be placeholders as well as the actual embellishment themselves. Here I've started using circles as clusters for the kind of typical 3-cluster layout design for embellishing, and I've just added a few pieces to each of those clusters to spice them up just a little bit, but the circles are really the focus here. And I've chosen those circles because my daughter is making a pie, which is a circle shape, so that lends well to the story. The next category is using circles in the background, and we'll start with more subtle circles and work our way up to more focused circles. So here I've got pretty typical coffee ring circles going on. So those are definitely very subtle, but they lend the mood, and I've enhanced that mood with another circular embellishment. Here is a slightly more obvious circular design, and this is a circle stencil that I've misted with some various spray inks to add a circular background to this layout, which reminds me of speakers since this is a layout about music. For this one, it's a little hard to see on camera. It's picking up just a little bit. I've created a background with circles, and in here is a tone-on-tone stamping with all kinds of little details about this day together. So we were out on a nature hike, and I stamped in a bunch of nature items to this background as the details. And this one goes back to using those products as part of your design as well. So these were rub-ons, and I used them in the background of my layout, but they're also placeholders for other elements of my layout. So this grouping of circles is clustered together to hold these photos. This grouping is clustered together to hold a slightly different photo, and so on and so forth. Now this one is a stitch circle. Well, at least it's an attempt at a circle. This was the first time I did stitching on my machine without pre-drawing my circle, and it's a little wonky, so I'll call it quirky. It's a little quirky, but again, that circle is in the background and it helps hold some of the details of the layout, like the title. Now, here is one that is going to do a couple of jobs. This one is in the background. It's also product that was already pre-designed as circles. So we've talked about those two things already. And it is also partial circles. So you don't have to have full circles to get the effects with the circles. Although I have added lots of extra circles in here along the way. So we'll talk more about partial circles in another category. Next up, I have circles as the photo highlight. And so this one was a cut file that I created to highlight my daughter's journey through her alternative school when she started at age 9 and when she graduated as a high school senior. So circles are a nice way to spotlight photos. Here is another spotlight from my daughter, and this was about the shoes that she asked for Christmas. And so that is how I spotlighted that photo. Now this one is a little bit different. I really wanted to use this design element as arcs, which relate to sound waves, and this is a layout about getting hearing aids for the first time. And so the arch came first in this design, and then I decided, since I had this semicircular design element happening, that it made sense for the photos to be circles as well. And that left great space along this design to do some journaling that has the story there but doesn't take over the page. And of course I didn't have enough room, so I did continue my journaling around the edge, and I do like to do edge journaling. That's a topic for another video. So these are using circles to highlight photos. Okay, these next two stacks are probably the largest set of stacks that I have, so we'll try to go through them a little quickly. We're going to start with frames of circles, and then we'll move on to other full circular designs. So here I've created a big frame using star sequins to create a big circular design. And again, that has kind of an energy to it that lends to this idea of the dance party. Now here is a frame cut file that I used, and I was talking about how the circle added energy to this layout, but over here the circle is actually adding that softness that we've already mentioned. And part of that softness also comes from incorporating the embellishments within the circle. And then here is another frame layout that I used various pieces of pattern paper to create this frame. So you don't have to use just one big circle, you can break it up into pieces. And in fact, here is where I broke it up even more. I used a product that already had circle punch outs to it, and I used it as a stencil to create all of these little bits of pattern paper that worked to go with this story. And again, I like the circle because it breaks up the hard edges of the photo and lends a softness and gentleness to the design. Now this is using a frame that is a much more full frame, so it's starting to kind of tone down the actual circle just a little bit with all of these leaves, as well as adding photos around the edges of this circle. And we're going to talk about that concept a little bit more later as well. And then here is one that I created this week that I just thought was beautiful. And this was using mixed media techniques to create my own circular element. And this was a scrap lift for a mixed media group. So this set of layouts is about the circle itself and not just a frame around a space. And how I want to describe that is using some scrap pieces of paper. So if I have this piece of paper and I put a hole in it, that is called the negative space. There is now a hole in my paper. But I can fill that hole with another piece of paper, and now that becomes a focus, and this piece of paper back here becomes a positive space to this circle. So these layouts are about using positive and negative circle spaces as part of our design. So having this watercolor paper as my positive space of this circle starts setting more of a vibrant mood, and then it is softened by the circular shape and the florals around the edge, because this is a layout about being nervous about my daughter's new driver's license and trying to find calm and peace in that. So these elements come together to do that. Now here is circles in that positive space that create a frame as well. So I've done both with this one. Now again, this one is not my design. I did this one in a class, but it is a really fun way to fill your circle space. This one is filled with all kinds of scrap pieces of paper to fill in that positive space on the circle. And so that was a really fun circular design. Now this one kind of incorporates a couple of different things. It has the circle as the focal photo, as well as how I've talked about journaling around edges, and that creates a little bit of a negative space to this circle, and then we have the outline of the circle going on with the mixed media. So all of these layers kind of come together as a bit of a target zoning in on that photo. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about grids. So here I created a grid of circles, and in fact, these are kind of a zigzag edged punched circles, but I've created a whole grid back here, and they are in the background of the layout. So you can use those circles as a grid in the background, and then they become great spots to add just little bits and pieces of embellishment. Okay, on this layout, the grid is doing more of a grid job where I'm using each circle as a space to provide a very specific bit of information to this layout. So each of these circles is holding one or two photos and its own bit of journaling. So this is much more grid-like. Now I do have a couple of layouts that are circular grids. So this is definitely creating a circle, but being its own space, it is also a grid. So you can mix and match things that way. And in fact, this layout right here got a little lazy with the idea of the grid. So I still have that circle going on, but instead of creating my photos as circle parts of the grid, I've just outlined my circle with the little photos themselves. We'll go through this next stack a little bit faster. This is still the idea of big circles, but they're a little offset, so they're leaving more room for other elements of the page. So this left a lot more, quote unquote, white space for these hearts to shine. This one the circle got sent more to the background from it being a partial circle and filling it up even more. So it just adds a little bit of softness and some space for journaling. Now this one as an offset circle, you can see my circle goes off the page. And again, this was one I did just by eyeballing it without measuring anything. So it is a little bit wonky, but that does add a specific energy to this layout with it being cut off. It's a little less formal and a little more fun, which is the mood I wanted for that story. Now here's the idea of using partial circles as very much design elements of the page. And then you'll notice that the partial circles I used are banners of half circles. So that is a fun one. And then here we're getting a little more combo going on with a circle made out of circles. So that is another way to mix and match these kind of design elements. And then for this one, this is just a partial outline of circles. So this circle was created entirely with embellishments. It only goes partway around the layout so that it leaves room for more photos, and it outlines the main photo. So this one looks less circular than some of the other designs. And since we just saw a winter layout, this is another winter layout, and I specifically created this circle to mimic a snow globe. So I'm adding to the mood of the story by mimicking other shapes. This could also be used if you turn it upside down. It could be a fish bowl if you have a story about fish. You could use it that way. And then just one last category here of these photos, and that is using circles to add a lot of movement and energy to pages. So this one, I punched out a ton of circles in various sizes and let them flow, and they start off more sparse and they get heavier and heavier as they go to add that weight and movement to the page. And then this one again is using my circles as my focal photos with the circles in the background to add movement and flow and energy across this layout. So that was the 12-ish, 13-ish ways to use circles in your design. So let's go ahead and combine some of those ideas and create a fresh layout for the end of this video.